You've heard of Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley. Of course, they're the biggest money managers in the world, and they don't manage a combined $13 trillion by accident. So when they're all talking about moving money into tangible assets, it's hard not to take notice. After all, the 60-40 stock bond portfolio is down an average of 34% this year, its worst performance in a century. But what tangible assets are we talking about? They named one that's guaranteed to surprise you: fine art. According to Goldman Sachs, fine art can help protect your purchasing power even as inflation spikes. It's also appreciated an average of 13.8% annually for the last 26 years. So it's easy to see why many investors are trying to protect their portfolios from inflation by investing in art through Masterworks. Masterworks qualifies each of their paintings with the SEC, so they can split them into shares for you to invest in. They've sold 5 paintings this year alone, with the last 3 delivering 17, 21, and 33% net returns. Masterworks returns speak for themselves, enough that there's even a waitlist right now. But good news is you can skip the waitlist by signing up at masterworks.com and using code MINTER, M-I-N-T-E-R. That's masterworks.com, promo code MINTER. See important Regulations A disclosures at masterworks.com/CD. Hey, and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 499. My name is Minter Dial, and I'm your host for this podcast, a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or check out other wonderful shows on the network, please visit evergreenpodcast.com. This week's interview is with my friend Eva Pascoe. Eva's famous for having co-founded the world's first ever internet cafe, Cyberia Cafe, back in 1994. With a career deep in e-commerce and retail, she's been a standout pioneer for having worked at TopShop, Dorothy Perkins, Miss Selfridge, and more. She's currently Director of Ecommerce at the Retail Practice Consultancy, co-founder and chair of cybersalon.org think tank, as well as having other directorships and advisory board positions. Most recently, Eva wrote one of the chapters of a near-term fiction book, 22 Ideas About the Future, with an introduction from Douglas Rushkoff. We discuss the future of retail, tech, and money, as well as dive into her particular story, The Summoned. A fascinating chat. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com, and please consider to drop in your rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show. Eva Pascoe. Pascoe. Great to have you on the show. You'll correct me. You are a multi-entrepreneur, maestra of all things digital, retail, contributor, writer. You do work in philanthropy. Such a wide and wonderful career and friend, Eva. In your own words, how would you like to describe yourself?
Me, I'm a techno pioneer and a futurist, but with a lot of respect for the past. So I'm also a closet historian.
Yeah, it's funny, this idea of whether we should be observing our past to understand the future, or should we destroy the past to recreate the future?
You know, I spend a lot of time thinking about those issues because I think somebody should. And, you know, as humans, we are really not well disposed to ponder on the future any more than the next 10 minutes. You know, we only change when we have to. We only improve when there is a crisis. So biologically, you know, for millions of years, we were really never in position to plan anything further than the next meal. And somehow that stayed with us. You know, I'm endlessly amazed how non-future oriented we are, and how, you know, we haven't really improved for last few hundred years. Our brains might have gone better, but our tools and as a society, we haven't really developed better ways of dealing with further future, which is we always in trouble as a result of it. we're stumbling around like toddlers. So I sort of took it upon myself, with a few other people, to really dedicate myself to trying to think that few steps ahead. So my space is really not, spaceships. I don't do space, although I love that, but it's not my bag. I look at near future, but beyond my next meal. So that's the kind of space I've been inhabiting for probably last 20 years. So I'm the co-founder of the first internet cafe back in the 90s, where nobody had email, there were no laptops, no Wi-Fi, yet academics, and I was doing my PhD, loved email, and we had amazing friendships online, and everybody was always falling in love with somebody over email. So we understood quite early that the digital life would be very interesting and very different. And we just wanted to bring it out to people. So we took it out from universities, opened the first cafe, and then we rolled it out worldwide to about other 6 countries, including Tokyo, which was really interesting, and Thailand, where people would come and serve the net in groups. That it was very much a collective activity. People were sitting, 5 around one computer, and there was one delegated to actually do the typing. So that was all immense fun. But it also taught me that people really need a bit of help with this digital life. And particularly because as it was early bohemian days, it was quite benign. Everybody meant well, everybody was academic and shared that very sort of positive, constructive approach to helping people online. Alas, capitalism is what it is. And quite soon, maybe by 97, 98, large companies started piling in. And they understood that this is a great place to manipulate people. This is a great place to influence people. This is a great place to make people do things they don't want to be doing. And it really was a battle since then. So we founded this think tank, Cyber Salon, back in 97, when the first third-party cookies appeared and were legalized. And we understood that this is all going to be about surveillance. So I was always looking at protecting digital rights as much as possible, because most people don't really understand what happens to them online. And particularly over the last few years, when artificial intelligence started powering up those online tools, and we became in the middle of the battle of the past and the future, because artificial intelligence tracks you and tracks and knows 100% your past. And it's constantly trying to throw you in the rail of that future, being exact extrapolation from the past, which is never a good idea, because we should be learning things, doing things better. Yet that immensely beautiful new technology is just making us do the same again and again, because it's used the companies to make us force habits that are then easily predictable and easily monetizable. So at the moment, we're just fighting, the past is great if you learn from it, but not if you keep repeating it. So that's kind of my take on the past versus future at the moment.
It's funny because there's certain irony in this idea of having no idea of the future just by meal, and this other trend, if you will, of meditation and being present, where the objective of being present is to forget about your worries, the worry mind. Stop fretting about the future and just being present, which sounds like what we're supposed to do at some level. And yet it is also at the abstraction from our past, our real past, and planning for the future.
Yes, it's very difficult, because obviously some people are naturally looking for crisis management. I've got quite a few friends who are extremely good project managers in the day jobs, but very fretty times of work, because it's just the mindset. So I think the challenge is to find a peaceful path between the two. But we do have increasing amount of challenges. And I think as a generation, we probably have to err on the side of slight anxiety, because things are mounting in front of us and we haven't really got the tools to deal with it. I remember this cartoon in New York Magazine, where a dinosaur is giving a lecture on the lectern, looking terribly important. And it said, "Gentlemen, the meteor is coming, but we have very small brains. And we are in the same position, the climate change is coming and we're sitting here with very small brains and no tools to deal with it." So that sort of thrown me a little bit into fiction, because all my life I was writing nonfiction. essays, raising awareness. I did a whole bunch of digital manifestos to help various political parties to maneuver this near future in terms of fiber optics connectivity, what should we do with digital education. But, you're preaching to the converted, you're preaching to the choir. When you write nonfiction, it's all very well. And, I'm hoping that some of it landed somewhere. But generally, people who pick it up are people who are already of that ilk. And we have to reach out a lot further to make things really address the future as it's in front of us. So we started exploring fiction a while ago, which was enormous fun. So I done a few writing courses and sat on a few amazingly fascinating workshops and kind of managed to find a bit of my brain, which was probably there all along. But I never gave myself space to write. So it was really great opportunity when we were approached by Dr. Christina Aicardi, who runs AI ethics program in King's College, to put a book together from the program of participatory futures, where you bring artists, writers, and experts to address certain parts of society ills, and together jointly pick up on what's the problem at the moment, what could be the problem within the next 2 or 3 years, because it's kind of near future, and try to write the stories that will visualize it for people so they can feel the emotional impact of all this tech thrown at us. And, we started from trying to be on the utopian, on the positive. Christina is an amazingly positive person. So she said, don't write dystopia, we don't want any of that. But, I'm writing and it gets very dark, and I'm writing more and it's darker, because you can see that we are just so incredibly disempowered. But we try to err on some positive. So the book that came out, the 22 Ideas About the Future, it's really a mixtopia, as we call it. So yes, plenty of dark, because a lot of that around, but we try to find little shards of hope in between.
Well, so I obviously want to get into that, Eva, but just beforehand, you said this notion of capitalism sort of has this nasty way of breaking down the ideals, the idealism that started at the beginning, and this picture of the 5 people around the computer and the people falling in love over emails. So there's sort of like this humanity piece within it. But I tend not to blame capitalism, but maybe more humanity's need to progress and the ways we progress. And inevitably, it progresses to this idea of money, which is one of the recurring themes in this new book, 20 Ideas About the Future, which is the future of money. But so capitalism, progress, humanity, which one is it?
Well, to step back, maybe, I was brought up in communism. Completely different system where money was kind of irrelevant. Nobody earned much. We were all equally poor. We were kind of equal, but very, very much on the lower end of affluence. So it was an interesting migration for me when I then swapped for capitalism and a system which is entirely about money. So I have a pretty good reflection on that, seeing which one is better, because obviously there were some advantages in communism, for example, for women, much better conclusion, because if the earnings are irrelevant, women were a lot more equal, childcare was free, there were things to cherish. However, overall, communism made very poor use of resources and was very bad for environment. It absolutely trashed anywhere it showed up. And I was brought up not too far from Silesia, where 20 years of communism and you couldn't breathe. It was so bad. The approach of eco futures has to be through democracy, because if people can't vote the rulers out, the easy choice is to do nothing. So I'm definitely erring on the free marketeer side, as it just allocates resources better, but it comes with a lot of problems, and we should try to address them. But you won't find me on the left of the left extreme, fighting for a system that was created in heads of few people around a coffee table. I'm very, very wary of systems created around any coffee table, left or right. I think free market has a lot to be set for in terms of allocating resources correctly and not forcing people to do what they don't want to do. Freedom thrives in free market. But in terms of the humanity, that's where our shortcomings as humans are that if you enter the sphere of money, we very quickly think about only one thing and become very one-sided. So there's actually a great story on money in the book, because we're heading to the environment where we'll have not just one money, but multiple currencies. We already have to a point, you have American Express points and Nectar points and Tesco points and Libra from Facebook, and everybody's got a little currency. And eventually we'll have
Bitcoins, of course.
Bitcoins, of course, Ripple, Solana, and we will have little bots that will just negotiate the exchange of the day and help us to buy things in the right currency of the time. And I think this is the direction we are heading. So our life is becoming even more monetized as the digital has moved in. While we were using cash and banknotes, it was still quite limited. It was still, a lot of the system is solely about money, but having them in a physical format was still keeping at bay the relentless financialization. Now we have digital money because we kind of almost entirely migrated to digital. Cash in developed societies is on the out, which is a separate issue, but we'll go to it later. But it just opened the doors into enormous amount of financialization that people couldn't even consider before. We have opportunity to fractionalize payments and can now charge less than a p, for example. We can, segment money to tiny and tinier bit, and people do. But it means that we are being wrapped more and more into a system which is solely about financial exchange as opposed to human or emotional exchange. So that's the bit which we're trying to find, because ultimately humans don't thrive in financialization. So I think free market, yes, but keeping money at bay and leaving ourselves space to breathe, live, meditate, and be happy is very important.
Well, so in the book, we're going to get to your piece momentarily, but in the book, you have this notion of how digitalization of currency also is a way to surveil and attribute value to people, and maybe even change the value of money according to the type of profile you are. So if you need an abortion, are you allowed to? Can you spend money, the money that you're allowed to, on such a service, depending on the morals? Which brings up for me the other question, which is, to what extent did you, as a team of 22, well, there are 22 ideas. There's some people who did a few together, same authors, but to what extent did you confer on your, let's say, political or philosophical approach to your mixtopias in terms of what you all believe otherwise?
I think we confirmed actually very little, because the process of writing was interesting. It was a combination of cyber salon approach, which is working with the experts and experts briefing the writers, and then writing, having a little bit of feedback as the pieces form. And the experts were quite versed in that, because a lot of experts do that as part of the research. So we work with some amazing people. Rachel Armstrong, who's a professor of living architecture, who has always been very strong on participatory futures and bringing experts to share the ideas as they form and get feedback, much more embedded research as opposed to just locking yourself up in the ivory tower. I'm sure the theoretical physicists do that, but nobody else needs to be doing that. So Rachel was very helpful with that. And also a couple of writers which we took as experts. So Yoon Oi, who's Chinese and had a very interesting view on Chinese surveillance versus Western surveillance. And I wouldn't say it was black and white. So she raised issues, for example, concierge, that I'm familiar with from Poland. So each of the block of flats has a concierge. And that concierge knows absolutely everything. That is the job.
All the rumors, the gossip.
Everything. But we had the same in Paris, for example. Right, of course. But the upside, as you noted, is that if somebody was ill, if somebody was not well, or if one of the kids were going slightly wild, she would know and she would help. She would put a little support system in place to rescue the situation before it escalated. And I remember exactly that, because, we used to smoke in Poland behind the dustbin then, and it could have gone further, but it didn't, because somebody kept an eye. The parents didn't know. The parents were at work. Nobody cared. Nobody really worried.
But the concierge would then hold something over you because she knew you were smoking.
That's exactly right. So there was very complex exchange being formed. And Yoon was saying that in China, you just have to have it because life is so incredibly complex. Without somebody like that, they couldn't manage it. So so she's bringing the point of convenience. Humans always trade surveillance for convenience. And these are the topics that we were mulling over with the experts. So one of the great stories in the book is by Britta Schulte. And I wouldn't say it's from experience, but she observed something that one of the older ladies in her apartment, in her block apartment, was organizing quite wild parties for, 75 plus. And yet she was wearing a bracelet because her family were concerned about her whereabouts for her health. And the stories about, how it pans out when grandma is having wild parties end, while the family is getting very strange messages about her whereabouts. And, how do you resolve it? Does grandma have the, freedom to do
a heart palpitation or a little bit of heart fun?
I figure it was a lot more on the fun side. But obviously the convenience of knowing for her health and her whereabouts was kind of, in conflict with trying to support her, living her life to the full if she chooses to do it. And I think this is the great debate, because what Rachel noticed, we're very much like a frog, slowly, the convenience of surveillance embraces us. And sometimes it's just so hard to choose not accepting cookies, not accepting that kind of warmth of, oh, everybody knows what I like and they always present me only what I like. So that was picked up really nicely in the story, Accept All Cookies, where you move in the new neighborhood and then somebody shows up with a tray of cookies and they know that you are gluten-free. So obviously the cookies are gluten-free, but they also know a lot more. But it's kind of convenient that they know what you like and your life just develops. And it's really nicely picked up as the guy from initial, oh, I don't like that. Oh, I'm not really comfortable with people knowing what I like. Oh, I should be doing something about it. To a few months later, he's the one who is welcoming the neighbor next door with gluten-free cookies because it just works. So, the insidiousness of surveillance and giving us these easy choices as we slide into that kind of, oblivion of everybody just warps around it. But as I started at the beginning, it's also giving us choices from our past. It's really stopping us from selecting new things. It's stopping us from looking at new ideas because it's easier not to.
Hey, small business leaders, are you looking for an easier way to onboard and manage remote employees? Or are you feeling you're just doing it all at your company? JustWorks makes it easier for you to start, run, and grow a business. So let me tell you how JustWorks can help your business. Give you an example. For anyone who follows my work, you'll know how deeply I believe that great people are at the heart of every business. And JustWorks can help you attract and retain top talent in a competitive market because their platform gives you access to rich benefits, usually only available to large corporations, plus a range of health, fitness, and financial perks, because you and your team deserve them too. And on top of that, the way people are working is changing. And you need human resources tools that can keep up. Whether your team is local, remote, or distributed, JustWorks helps you comply with state payroll tax requirements, keep up with their state labor laws, and access health insurance plans in any state. They also provide proactive support for federal, state, and local employment-related compliance needs. JustWorks makes it simple to hire and manage remote employees across all 50 states of the United States. It's a cloud-based platform that enables managers and employees alike to quickly and securely access benefits, payroll, and other HR functionality from anywhere, anytime. They provide an intuitive, self-service user experience that makes admin easier for the whole team. And they provide help when you need it with 24/7 expert support for you and your employees. By the way, JustWorks believes it's your right as a customer to have a phenomenal service experience every time. Also provides access to certified HR consultants who can provide tailored guidance and best practices around managing your people, with transparent pricing with no hidden costs, so you always know exactly what you're paying for. You can run your business, therefore, with confidence with JustWorks. So take a look at JustWorks transparent pricing by visiting justworks.com/pricing. That's justworks.com/pricing for details. Well, I was just thinking about how there are so many peanut allergies now because we're no longer eating peanuts or being exposed to peanuts, which by itself is provoking more peanut allergies, some research points out.
Totally. And you could see that in after COVID, how many kids got ill because they spent 2 years at home not being exposed to other germs. And I think it's the same with food. We actually had a really great story in the books, Bits and Bacon, about that surveillance of food by the nanny state, where at some point somebody concluded that eating meat is really bad for you, so your digital money is controlled and doesn't allow you to buy these things. In the same way, like in the heartbeat story, your digital money stops you from having abortion because it can be programmed. The money is becoming programmable. I kind of seen it already in the pub. Somebody was wearing this Fitbit, and we were drinking pints, probably more than we should have, probably way too many. And at some point, the Fitbit is sending a message, and someone says, "Oh no, I can't drink anymore," because the sugar is a sugar monitoring device as well, and the glucose was spiking. He was a perfectly healthy guy, but it's people are erring on this optimizing to perfection where your body should be, which probably is a good idea, but it's just so strange being part of it. So we got to the point where we are so digitalized that instead of being anxious about real things, we're becoming anxious about unreal things. Somebody was telling me last night, actually, that there is only 4% of population that is genuinely gluten intolerant. Yet when you look at the gluten-free diet, like half of the population seems to be on it. So, we kind of are over-informed and under-informed. And we haven't quite negotiated that passage from knowing so much about our bodies through the digitalization and responding to artificial intelligence advice to do only what is safe and only what we have done before. So that's the limitation that we need to hack against.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story when I was playing sports in England. Sometimes I would run a lot. Of course, I was always running anyway. And I had pain sometimes in my legs, and you just got over it. Stiff upper lip, deal with it. I got to America, and I went to a school in America for a year. And I was doing the same sports, and the same injuries came. And oh, you have shin splints. So I know I just have some pain in my legs. No, it's called shin splints. You need to treat it. I'm like, well, no, I just need to deal with it. That's how it goes. So the idea of naming it was gave it more presence, more substance. And just want to go back, Eva, the idea of convenience. It feels for me like that's a convenient word, convenience. One could attribute two other ideas to it. One is efficiency, and the other is laziness. Which one do you think is more appropriate to the way the human is?
Well, human body is designed to do as little as possible. Given our free choice, we would just stay in bed with our headsets on and live our life, under the duvet. Do you remember there was a movie, Surrogates, I think, which is exactly that, where people spend all the time in bed with VR headsets, having this incredibly interesting life as avatars while just getting fat and sick. So, when you look at our future, that it's not an impossible direction, because it's always nice and easy and warm under duvet, and why bother? So as technology develops to wrap us around our convenient desires, it delivers that. You have plenty of opportunities to do it to a degree today. I actually do work quite a lot on VR at the moment, and we do it differently. We do it for physical activity, very much with body somewhere and doing things physical, but the temptation is there. So, the way we construct it drives us to, laziness is it's a statement. It's more like conserving energy, because where we come from, there was never enough food. There was never enough resource. We had to conserve energy. So we're not, unless we hyper, types, which obviously many of us are, but unless you are skewed that way, the human base default behavior is to conserve energy. So if technology allows you some choices to do less and to go with convenience, that's just because that's the way we construct it, and we have to fight against it, be aware of it.
Well, I think that's probably the motivation of your book, 20 Ideas, to sort of, through the use of near-term fiction, stimulate people to get the idea, the energy to fight against this overwhelming tsunami of oh so easy convenience.
Yes, because I think at the moment humans are losing. We have such enormous progress in science of addiction. The whole departments in Stanford University, not looking far, UCL, about this behavioral nudging. And they're all dressed up as nudging for good. But trust me, people who graduate from this place, 99% of them will be nudging for just getting more money out of you in any way they can. So it's really quite heartbreaking because, by background, I'm a UX designer, and I studied with, beautiful, enormously humanistic driven professors. It was about making UX better for nuclear power dashboard design, or making information serve people better. And somehow along the way, half of the scientists decided, oh, this could be really fun to teach people how to manipulate people through that. And all this enormous science that, has been developed over years and years is now being deployed and taught at universities how to manipulate all of us. And we have no chance. Like, honestly, we have no chance. The degree of sophistication that goes into design of games to keep the kids in them, it's insane. I mean, this is beyond Nobel Prize level. So we as humans just sit there and pray that that the business models will run its course and they will all do something else, because we have no chance. So that was the cry for help in the book. And actually, interestingly, we came up with fiction, because you can't tell people that, this is not something that just goes into the brain. You can explain to people, show them diagrams, show it to nothing. It just goes nowhere. So fiction is probably our last cry for help. And people try. So probably one good example that I really like, there's a very good story in the book by Jess Rowell from Hawaii, American writer, a very, very good technical developer who knows how far we can go when we build. And he wrote this quite disturbing story about the Valence program, where the government decides to use social media towards its best out and create these fictionary characters that people can hate, and then use that to get communities to bond together against that hated character. And then the character gets expelled from the community, and everybody breathes sign of relief and carries on safely a little bit further. And, this is basically the story of the, snake oil salesman from the Wild West, or the witches earlier on. We do that. But the idea that somebody would do that as a way of positively managing communities was quite shocking. But it also picks up on why this is a bad idea, because to create this bogeyman, this sort of frightening individuals, mythical individuals, they are composed of traits that we naturally are suspicious of or dislike. So traits of migrants, traits of women, traits of minorities. So it doesn't really solve the problem. It just pushes the problem a little bit further to the future. But it's written I had spine on my back when I was reading that. And that I will remember. And I think that people will remember. And next time they have, some campaign by the right-wingers online trying to get us to hate somebody, maybe they will think a little bit longer. Just awareness how that easily can be done.
If I could add, from the left-wingers for the right equally, at a geopolitical level, that's often the idea. We'll make the enemy over there, and then we can ramp up our defenses and make the narrative about our foreign affairs and forget some of the issues in the domestic affairs. That is certainly playing out. I wanted to just chat all the same about The Summoned. So your piece, which, as you said, was, as I understand it, was the first piece of fiction you wrote. So the way I looked at it was you were having a go at exclusivity and elitism and how to break through. That's how I read it.
Yes, it was a bit of a rant because I'm also a gamer, and what we were looking at money and the proliferation of currencies. And the one thing which always irritates me in games is that you make an effort, you learn the rules, and you're beginning to win, and you gain all this currency. And then halfway through, they launch another currency within the same game, and you have to start again. Or you play a very similar game, which has got yet the third currency. So my kind of initial bouncing point was like, honestly, it's just ripping kids off. And if we could make it interoperable, that would really change the way we use time. Because, when you see how much time gamers put into games, it's hundreds of hours. It's like at least 40 hours per game. If we could use that as an asset and build on it, even as a collaboration with a bigger group, you are opening very interesting entrepreneurial directions. So that was kind of I started with. But then, at the same time, I've got kids in American universities, and I was just going through the process of application. And I thought, how insane is that system where you have legacy baked in and actually is baked in? So the privilege carries on. The same families that arrived whenever on the first boat are still there because it's baked in the system. And even my reasonably democratically minded American friends don't think anything of it. It just is. So, so I kind of talk about it with this metaphor of the tall men who arrive from the East and take over, while in fact, the real heroes are the local tall men who have worked within the existing communities long enough before anybody else arrives. So, it's not a go on any particular boats people, of course, but it was a shocking to me in the American system how acceptable it's that it's not marriage-based, but it's privilege-based, and how not discussed it is. I met an interesting woman who wrote a book called EduPunk, Anya, who a while ago was taking quite a strong stand against the recruitment practices of universities in US. And, it attracted a fair amount of commentary, but nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, it's still exactly the same. So I think sooner or later, Americans will have to tackle it. But it's basically all about how we resolve the privilege of previous generation passing on while not losing the incentive for people to work. Because obviously, if you stop people from passing on the privilege, why would we be working? So I don't have any answers, but I thought it would be interesting to raise that in the story. Plus, I like myths, I like fables. So it's ended up to be a bit more of a fable.
Well, it was very enjoyable to read, and it made me, well, so at one level, just to sort of debate somehow the story, I feel like there's a humanities element to this idea of a legacy at some level, where you look at country by country, how often there are families that dominate the Politburo or the government or a company. And it seems to be something that's fairly spread out over the world. And then the other second anecdote or thought is that in France, I don't have the exact fact, but there was a study that said that, and maybe I read it in France, it might have been more international, but that some vast proportion, a majority of all CEOs tend to be tall and men, and typically tall, thin, and men. And so that fell into the tall men story that you have. And yet I feel like it feels like it's actually another form of exclusivity.
Yes, absolutely. And it's actually, it goes further. I'm quite tall, and I was very young when I had my first CEO position. I think I was barely 30. So, I remember putting these high heels on. It helped. So, I had to work with fantastic people, but because I was quite young in the field where there were no women, because it was a technical job, and also, you just came as a complete nobody, and having that advantage of height absolutely helped, and it still does. It's insane how strange humans are calibrated to attribute something in terms of leadership to height. But, obviously there's plenty of amazing leaders who haven't got that advantage. But it is a fraction high if you are. I've got a lovely friend who is tiny, and she's an amazing leader. But, oh my God, she's got to make twice as much noise than I do. So
Right.
I think there is something inbuilt in the system, but it's one of these things we have to fight against, be aware of that it's there.
Please be aware. I mean, otherwise you might also think about the Napoleonic idea, chip on my shoulder, because I'm smaller, I've got to do more, or because I'm a woman, I have to do more to compete. And that motivating factor within to fight against the system is also a strong driver.
Yeah, I'm really sure that half of it was my reasonably successful relationship with Philip Green. He was on my board for quite a long time. We worked quite closely together, and he was a force of nature, but I was taller than him, and it put our relationship at a fraction better footing. I mean, obviously, I left when I realized what was going on, but it was quite interesting that you can work on it. But in the idea, it was really fascinating when we moved to Zoom. I think we observed that suddenly that whole
we're all the same size.
Huge. And when we started coming back, because obviously I met a lot of people from my companies during COVID, I had no idea if they're tall, high, whatever.
Right.
Suddenly when we came back to the offices, it's like, right, there might be like a half a meter difference somewhere. By then it didn't matter. But would they have been in the position of leadership if it wasn't COVID? I honestly don't know. So it's in some way, virtuality is much more equal, and it's very exciting. When you see people in VR, I hosted a great conference recently when Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, was launching his new developments, and I hosted it in VR. So we were all avatars in a room with an audience sitting on it was a bit ridiculous because we were sitting on audience seats. We didn't need to. We could just mill around because you're an avatar. You don't need to be sitting. There is no gravity in virtuality, which is good because we won't need brass in virtual world, which I'm quite excited about it.
There you go.
But the whole experience of being in this virtual space, and you can just pick your avatar as you want it. Tall, small, average, it's great. It's really democratic. So in some way, that movement to VR will hugely empower people. And for better, for worse, we are making that transition. And that bit is a good bit.
Well, we'll see how humanity plays with the rest. So encouraging everybody to go and check out 20 Ideas About the Future, and of course to read your particular piece on the summon, but the others are phenomenal stories as well. I want to move in just for the last part, Eva, talk about the future of retail. So the near future of retail, 2023, 2024. It seems, and I was, before thinking about the question, I wanted to come up with a list of which is the biggest challenge for retail? And it just got longer and longer. Is it a macroeconomics problem, a microeconomics problem? Is it customer deafness? Is it labor shortage? Is it a poor user experience customer journey? Consumer fatigue, we don't want to buy anymore, climate change, political upheavals, inflation, confusion on how to do marketing, e-commerce, plus, multi-channel. Oh my gosh, how does one drive successfully retail into this near future?
Retail has always been about solving problems. That's what retail does. So, all that long list you just gave me, we just solve it one by one. Retail will always exist. There will always be something people want to buy. But I think the big shifts at the moment are around the two topics you mentioned. So the big shift is inflation. I go back in retail quite a while. So I traded my first entrepreneurial stores when the inflation was about 8%. So this was coming down from 15%. So this is not my first rodeo. So I kind of I have my way around it. You just have to micromanage, increase the prices, cut the cost, increase the prices, cut the cost. It's a very much little and often. And you buy slightly differently. But, there are people who remember, we just teach the younger generation will be fine. That is solvable. However, the labor shortage, which we obviously increased massively by Brexit, but I think it was coming anyway because there is a demographic dip. That's a really tricky one because, the retention of staff is impossible. We are paying about 20% more in wages at the moment, and we still can't retain people because they know if they move, they get 20% more somewhere else. So working with companies which do not retain knowledge, because that knowledge just migrates out of the door the second you taught them, that's a new one. and that does not feel, it's very unproductive because you spend a lot of time training and then you never really settle. So that's a huge challenge, and I haven't seen it quite as bad as now. I'm hoping that they will sort out some kind of softization of Brexit, because with a number of industries, we are really, I think it's a luxury we can't afford anymore. Brexit was a kind of like right-wing luxury. I honestly don't think we can afford it. But, it's the same in other countries for different reasons. America has a massive labor shortage at the moment. When you read this city announcements, oh my God, Meta has let 10,000 people go. No, they all called them through the back door, giving them jobs in different departments because they can't afford to let people go. It's just for show, for the, NASDAQ to look like you are a macho leader who can react quickly, but they cannot afford to lose anybody at the moment. So, half of people that Musk let go, they immediately got a call to join different departments. It's all bullshit. And the same in Europe, so we're basically going for a demographic dip that we're struggling with. And the third challenge for us is the role of a retailer. The traditional role of a retailer was to sell physical things. And with Web 2, we moved to selling those physical things through digital environment. But in the majority, they were still physical objects, like books, like items, like clothing. But now we're entering Web 3, and I can see a lot more digital product being sold on digital platforms. And that's a bit trickier because the obviously opportunity for fraud is higher. You could be, developing your nice collections on NFT, and then somebody empties your wallet, and that's the last you've seen on it. It's all kind of still quite Wild West out there. Yet people want it. People are thinking, I've got a cupboard full of stuff anyway. How do I express my identity? How I do what I like to do, but without contributing to yet more landfill, to yet more pollution? People are beginning to sort of get the hang of it. So I really see people getting interested in digital fashion when you buy amazing designs for your avatar and you express your identity, your artistic taste, your styling in that way without, doing any more environmental damage. I mean, trust me, I've been in fashion so many years. I've contributed to a few landfills in my life. I really don't want to do it anymore if I can. So we're working very, very hard on a digitization of those expressions of personality, but also with the tail end of the physical. The retailer will have to be responsible for disposing of it in an eco-friendly way. So, there's a legislation coming. We had a big debate in House of Commons 2 weeks ago, and it's coming. It's probably not a couple of years before it settles, but basically forcing the manufacturer and the retailer to be responsible for end of life of those products. So we will be able to send it back, get 10% off from the next purchase, but the retailer will have to dispose of it ecologically. It's much easier to do on a large scale. The idea that you as a consumer can ever dispose of anything sensibly, it's just ridiculous. It's not possible because it's a scale. Recycling is a scale, and you can do a lot of good things if you have scale. So it really all has to come back to wherever it came from, and then we deal with it on the retailer, on the brand side at scale. And that's already panning out, but it has to be legislated, because obviously, business being business, they won't do anything unless they absolutely have to. But if they have to, there are solutions. And also, if they have to, then they will put more energy in designing the bloody thing in the first place in the eco way, that it's either extending circularity of the item or being disposable easily. Who's really good, doing great job on it is the Swedish, the Scandinavians, as always, leading the way in, closing the loop, being intelligent about it, and don't put responsibility solely on the consumer, because the consumer can do very little. It's a bigger issue. So, the role of a retailer, from flogging things, it's now more into managing the service of you owning something for a bit, and then we take care of what happens of it after. So it's a very, very different role. But the role of retailer is always changing, and that it attracts people who like problems. We have plenty of problems, so I'm fairly confident we will solve those bits.
Lots to unpack in that, Eva. Thinking of a tweet that I saw yesterday about how much would you be prepared to spend on digital fashion. So I'm now rethinking. You've opened my mind to that. And then as far as this labor shortage, I absolutely believe that it's not a Brexit related thing. I think it's more related to people's fulfillment feeling, and what are they doing spending 40 hours wherever they're working, and do they feel fulfilled at what they're doing? And at the same time, I thought, as you spoke about the way people spend 10, 20% more, if you hire over here, it's very much like the financial markets, though the financial services type of attitude, but they have distinctly higher margins, whereas retailers do not generally. And then the last comment I had is the idea of that we've gone away from consuming so many goods and having cupboards filled with all these items which we can't take with us to our grave. We've also discovered that life is about experience more than the toys and clothing. And yet there's still a need for identity and the power of brands. And so maybe there's a lot to throw back at you, but look at, for me, the role of a retailer to help with our sense of fulfillment and identity.
Yes, absolutely. We are collective animals. We signal. Everything we do is signaling. We don't think about it. It comes from some, deep part of the brain, the old brain. But it's all about survival. And survival was about, doing the right things with the right group, or you'll be eaten. So we are still very much doing the right things with the right group. If we were Gucci or Prada or Patagonia or Stussy, these are all very, very meaningful choices. Or if we were vintage, my daughter buys nothing; it's all vintage, but it's the right type of vintage.
Like my daughter.
So I'm very proud of her that she does it. But it's still very much expression of personality. What type, from which shop, which vintage is more kosher than other. Humans will always signal, and we just have to support it in a way that is as eco-friendly as possible. Because the clock is ticking on us, and we are drowning in rubbish, we are drowning in waste. When you travel particularly for places that don't hide it, like partially Eastern Europe, but also there are parts of UK that don't hide it. It's insane what's going on with the landfill at the moment. So we're very conscious that we have to solve it, and I think we have the right people. We certainly have the right design culture. The design schools have done very, very good job. Royal Academy of Art, and basically most of design schools in UK, in US, in Germany, in Holland, in Scandinavia, they're really teaching that ground up now. When you look at the education of how product design is done now, they are really ramming it into the kids. That think about the effect of it at the end of the line. What happens to it? The one battle which is particularly strong for me is the trainers. It's like one step forward, 20 steps back. We are all addicted to trainers. Everybody I know has got 20 pairs, this for that, and this for walking, this for running, God knows what, and half of it just for show. Trainers are the worst culprits. There's about 20 types of plastic in each trainer, and it is possible to recycle. So whatever people try to greenwash it, Nike once in a while releases some greeny trainers, complete nonsense. It is the worst thing for the environment. Yet, that information hasn't sort of sunk through. There were books and books about it, but obviously, again, it preaches to the converted. People just ignore it. And brands have done great job selling the idea of looking sporty. They've done nothing on what is the end of life of this product. And the end of life is not really good because of the complexity of the product. So that's a battle which is still looming large, and with very, very little ownership of those brands who are the main culprits. I would say the fast fashion companies in other categories are doing a little bit better job. So that would be interesting, because that hits right in the core of the identity. People die for these trainers. They get up 2 a.m. for the drop online of the new collection. They are really tied up very tightly with our identities. So this is going to be interesting, because this is asking a big question. So I think that's in front of us. But, I am an optimist, despite, seeing all the things going wrong, because I do a lot of Wikipedia. And at the end of the day, you see that Wikipedia and gathering of the right facts and information eventually gets picked up by NGOs, eventually gets picked up by charities, then eventually that gets picked up by the media, and eventually people understand a little bit more. So, tech gives, takes away, but on the whole, we are ahead.
Eva, on that wonderfully positive note, I want to thank you. That was just a stirring conversation. You're really very inspiring. And I would like to ask you how anyone can, what's the best way to follow your readings? Where would you like people to go? And of course, how to get your latest book, 22 Ideas About the Future.
It's best to go on Amazon or Waterstones, and you can pick up from a fair amount of independent shops. And I'm on cybersalon.org and also evapascoe.com for more future of work conversations. So you can find me on any of those channels.
Where you blog frequently. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful chat, Eva.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust is the reason. Still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust in my reason, and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man, practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man, here in these confines. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, admit to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man, in the arms of a woman.
The world's best-known investor and Wall Street expert Warren Buffett once said, "Wall Street is the only place that people ride to in a Rolls-Royce to get advice from those who take the subway." Mr. Buffett's quote is remarkably accurate, but how many people would rather receive advice from him than someone simply guessing? Welcome to Buy, Hold, Sell, your single source for Wall Street knowledge and profitable guidance. Please join me, Todd Schoenberger, and fellow trader Tobin Smith, as well as host Veronica Dudo, for a podcast known to move the needle for investors. Tobin and I are seasoned Wall Street executives with deep investment experience, and we are prepared to share our advice to those who choose to listen. Download Buy, Hold, Sell today on the Evergreen Podcast Network or your favorite podcast channel.